Hello, gentles and ladymen. I'm Ulan Gaming, and I'm redoing all of my tier lists. So, for context, for those of you who are new, uh, about a year or two ago, Aussie Drongo made some tier lists for most of the unit types in the game. Missed a couple, and those lists have since become incredibly outdated and missing a lot of new civilizations that have come out since, as well as, of course, not taking into account balance changes. So I made tier lists for all the unit types about 6 months ago. For that included all of the units from the new civilizations and and taking new balance changes into account. But now those ones are outdated, as well as missing several units. My opinions have also changed slightly since then on a lot of the units, and so I am redoing them with the new Knights of the Mediterranean expansion. Uh, and I'm going to be bringing you all of the tier lists one unit at a time. We're going to start this time with mercenaries, and then we're going to move from there to probably heavy cavalry or light infantry, and work our way through all of the unit types one by one until maybe, if I feel like it, we'll do nadas at the end as well. Although I'm pretty sure you guys all know what that tier list is probably going to look like. Now, when I was thinking about which one I wanted to do first, I decided I was going to go with Mercenaries first because this one was the one by far that had the most missing units and mistakes of my previous tier lists that I wanted to fix. Right. So this is the one that I'm going to be focusing on first. You guys are free to watch my previous tier lists, but I would encourage to just wait for the new ones because those ones will be far more accurate as well. Now, as for what makes me as an individual qualified to make these kind of tier lists. I've been playing this game for years, but many people have. But I have an incredibly intimate game knowledge. Now, I'm not the best player at this game. I float around the 1300 elo mark, but I have an incredibly high amount of game knowledge, which comes from me helping a friend of mine in our Discord server create a Age of Empires 3 companion app that required me to input pretty much every single unit's stats and stats and multipliers against other units into a Excel document and send it to him. So I am very, very familiar with the ins and outs of pretty much every unit in this game. So we shall start our tier lists as such. Now, when I do tier lists, S class units are not the only units that you want to be using. S class units mean they are the absolute echelon of a unit, but where an average, good quality, very usable unit is going to lie is in the B class. B class is the average, like the average level. It is a solid unit. It is a unit that is serviceable. It's a unit that does its job well. It's relatively upgradable. Yada yada yada. D class is, of course, the ones that you want to avoid. So that is how we are going to kind of do these tier lists. We kind of want most of the units to end up in the B tier. So with that, let's begin. I think I'm going to start with the D tier with mercenaries. Same thing I did last time. And we're going to start off by throwing pretty much the two most obvious D tier ones in there, and those are Napoleon guns and little bombards. Now, Napoleon guns are just incredibly expensive. They're only a little bit better than leather cannons, which is what they are a mercenary version of. Uh, but they cost a whopping 500 coin, which is absolutely nowhere near worth. Which is absolutely nowhere near representative of their actual stats. They will sink your money like nothing else and die quicker than pretty much any other mercenary you've ever seen. The little bombard is, on the other hand, is an absolute powerhouse of a cannon and will decimate everything it touches. But it's here for the same issue of being way too high costing. It costs a whopping 1,000 coin per little bombard, which is not cheap, to say the least. Now the little bombard is is in a couple civilizations as an Age 4 shipment option, and in those cases, the little bombard can do its job pretty well. But in terms of actually training them at the tavern, they're not exactly what you're wanting. The little bombard often has the issue of just you never have enough of them, and they're too flimsy for their cost. So that is where our only two cannons lie. Also in the D tier, we're going to throw the Arsonist for the simple issue of it's a mercenary version of a unit that's already not very good. The Grenadier. The Arsonists have a lot of range resistance. They do a pretty okay amount of damage, but for some reason they just lose against everything. And really, that's just the crux of the matter. They get outclassed by Owl Hoots from USA, which is kind of sad. Uh, yeah, let's. So that's going to be our D tier for now. I think I'm going to start moving around, let's jump up to the upper echelon into the S tier and figure out what our best of the best mercenaries are going to be, and we'll work our way down from there. So in terms of S class, there are two that I can think of right off the bat to put in here. One is the Mameluke, and the other is the where are you? The Elmeti. Both of which are here for the exact same reason. These guys are very tanky boys. These guys are very, very tanky boys. These units are absolute monsters on the fields. The Elmeti and the Mameluke, they are both Age 4 locked mercenaries. They both cost a hefty sum of coin. I think they're 400 apiece. They both have a gargantuan amount of hit points, though. The Elmeti has 1100, and the Mameluke has 1600. However, I do believe the Elmeti makes up for its lack of HP by having multipliers against infantry. These guys, if they are on your front lines, they are not going to die. They're going to take forever to die, and anything behind them is going to get free pot shots off of the enemy's military until he finally figures out how to bring down your Mamelukes and Elmeti. These mercenaries are so powerful, even in Age 4, when you have a whole bunch of unit upgrades, that oftentimes shipping Mamelukes or Elmeti is a GG button in itself and will end games just right then and there. The Mameluke and the Elmeti will pretty much always be S-class, I'm 90% sure. Also joining our upper echelon S-tier mercenaries is going to be the Senar Horseman. The Senar Horseman is a slightly lighter, tamer version of both the Mameluke and the Elmeti. It has the HP of the Elmeti, which is the lower of the two, and it has the attack of the Mameluke, which is, again, the lower of the two. However, what it makes up for, what it lacks in either of the X factors of the Mameluke and Elmeti, it makes up for the fact that it's available in Age 3. Now, it still costs just as much. I think it still costs 400. But essentially, the Senar Horseman is just a Mameluke, but in Age 3. It has Elmeti stats. It has 1100 HP. If you're leaning really heavy into the mercenaries, they're not even like that hard to mass, really. These guys, I mean, they are, obviously, but, you know, they're not the hardest things to mass. I mean, these guys will just absolutely tank, and they do the job of the Elmeti, but an age early when everything else is a lot lower in stats, and for that reason, it goes up in the upper echelon in the S-tier category, just like everything else. Yes, that is one of our new representatives in the S-class. What I think I'm going to talk about next are the Musketeer variants, the Musketeer skirmishers, of which there are 3, if I am not mistaken. There's 4, actually. First is the Highlander. I view the Highlander as just a very middle of the pack, mercenary. It's just a musketeer, but with better stats. That's all it is. It's not anything particularly special. It does its job. If you need more musketeers, then you ship this card. But I mean, really, there's never too much reason to send this card, but there's never too much reason to not send this card either. It's just a nice little bump to your forces if you want it, and they can absolutely pack a punch, but You know, they're not going to win you the game in one go like the Mamelukes, the Elneti, or the Sinar Horsemen will. Similarly, for the exact same reason, the Ascari is going to go in here as well. The Ascari and the Highlander are rather comparable, I think. But both of them are just unremarkable musketeers with high stats. That's all they are. That's all they need to be. They do their job just fine. However, there are two of the musketeers that I'm going to put above them in A tier. First of which is the Fusilier. The Fusilier is here because it has high movement speed. It has this X factor that makes it special and worthwhile as opposed to just normal musketeers. Fusiliers have like 5 or 5.5 movement speed or something ridiculous like that. I mean, these guys zoom. They march. They have a marching animation, but goddamn, you could mistake them for like the Aztec war chief with how fast they march. These guys have an absolutely absurd amount of range attack, and they just get the job done. These guys slaughter everything in their path. Sweden can train them in the second age, which is pretty awesome. It's rather niche, but it can get the job done, especially since it only takes 3 Fusiliers to one-shot a settler, which is exactly how many you get with the shipment, and with them being fast, it makes Fusiliers great at raiding for Sweden in Age 2, but just even in general, the Fusilier is just a powerhouse of a unit, and its stats and attack are not anything particularly special over that of the Highlander or the Ascari, but just what puts it over, I think it is a little higher than them anyways, but what really puts it over the edge is the very fast movement speed, which cannot be understated about how valuable of an asset that is. Movement speed is, after all, like the best stat in the entire game. Also, above the Ascari and the Highlander, we are going to be putting the Giant's Grenadier. The Giant Grenadier is a very beefy version of these two units, as you might be able to tell from the name. But the real treat of the Giant Grenadier is the fact that it has range. It has area of effect on its range attack, much like the Akan from much like the Akan Musketeer. It makes these units really good for the same reason that armored pistoliers are, in that they just fucking shred everything they shoot at, and there's pretty much no stopping the Giant Grenadier mass once it gets going. They will just shred. They shred skirmishers. They shred everything pretty much, and there's no two ways about it. The armored pistolier is going to go at the top of B tier. Now, originally the armored pistolier was an S tier unit. However, in the most recent patch, they severely nerfed the pistolier's damage. They cut it by like what felt like a third. The armored pistolier is tankier than the Giant Grenadier, and likewise also has area of effect on its range attack. But it had pretty much just as much attack as the Giant Grenadier. It was also reasonably inexpensive at only like 250 gold apiece. But now it does notably less damage than the Giant Musketeer, and is pretty much in the place where it is now because of its incredibly high HP. Which, honestly, I think I might put the Grenadier just above the armored pistolier here, or maybe just below, something like that. Because I do still think the armored pistolier is very good. I just don't think it was originally as game-breakingly broken as it was before. The best Malta strategy for the first week or so when Malta came out was to fast fortress and ship these guys and just win. They would just push in, and the enemy couldn't stop them, and you would just win. Just point blank and period. Our next Musketeer unit is actually going to go in the A tier, and that is the Irish Brigadier. The Irish Brigadier is in A tier for the exact same reason that the Cannoneer is in A tier, and that is that they are both Age 2 available mercenaries, the only two in the game, and both of them only take up 1 population. In addition, the Irish Brigadier is relatively cheap as well. It is a musketeer that has some pretty solid base stats, nothing out of the ballpark, but definitely a little higher than normal. That benefits from promotions is the Irish Brigadier's gimmick. So the Irish Brigadier really gets rolling once you get quite a few of them and you get some promotions going. Irish Brigadiers are very, very good, and if you have an Age 2 Mercenary build for if you spot Cannoneers, I know my own Brigadier strategy that I create, my own Cannoneer strategy that I created for USA is going to benefit very well if I ever spot Irish Brigadiers in the tavern as well, because it's the same concept. It takes advantage of the same. It takes advantage of the same thing that I take advantage of with Cannoneers, and that is just that it's a powerful unit in Age 2 that you can mass very, very quickly with USA's sheer ridiculous coin income if you choose to invest in it. So that's the reason the Irish Brigadier comes in here. Additionally, Malta has a shipment for Irish Brigadiers that ships freaking 11 of them in the Second Age, and that is just a humongous amount of Irish Brigadiers. Even after the nerf that they got in the most recent patch, they're still just ridiculous. So you have to respect the Irish Brigadier mass whenever you see it. This new expansion brought a lot of Musketeer, brought really a lot of Musketeer mercenaries. There didn't used to be anywhere near as many of them, but now there are like 5 of them, and it is quite a few, to say the least. All right, now let's fill out our C tier a little bit, so you can get an idea about what's going in there. The first thing that comes to mind when I'm talking about the C tier is the Landsknecht. Now, Landsknecht did recently, did a while ago get a boost, so that they actually do have area of effect, making them somewhat worthwhile. The problem with the Landsknecht, though, is that they're very, very slow and easy to pick off. Your opponent can just shred Landsknechts one by one. If Landsknechts get in contact with an enemy, then they will shred them in seconds. But the getting into contact part is what's challenging about them, and generally there are just better options than Landsknechts whenever you're trying to come up with a mercenary to hit hard. Landsknechts are really, really good at their job, but what their job is a support unit that goes and burns down buildings while your primary force fights while the enemy doesn't notice. That's the job of a Landsknecht. Similarly, in C tier, we are going to throw in the Ninja. Now, the Ninja is a very good unit. It has a decent hand attack, it's fast, it can go into stealth. The problem is that it's very niche in what it does. Now, what it does very, very well, and that is hunt other mercenaries and hunt, as well as hunt heroes. But very, very few people, and it is very rare that you will come across a game where somebody has a pure mercenary build, and so ninjas have very limited use, because in addition to seeing that the enemy is going mercenaries, you also have to invest in mercenaries yourself, and then also hope that the tavern has ninja in it for you to train in order for you to really take advantage of these. So not only are they just niche that they just fight other mercenaries, they're also extremely niche just because you need 2 people to go mercenaries in the same game, and for the tavern to have ninjas available at it. And it's just not great, you know. I actually think I might throw ninjas down here, but you know they are still relatively serviceable. Yeah, we're gonna throw it here with the arsonist. I think there's very rarely a reason when you want ninjas in your army, as opposed to giant grenadiers. If I spot ninjas and cannoneers, I'm making cannoneers. If I spot ninjas and fusiliers, I'm making fusiliers. You know, there's very little reasons where you would want to take the ninja over another mercenary type. Let's add another one to the C tier here, and that's going to be the Barbary Corsair. The Barbary Corsair is a mercenary version of Rodaleros. They have 6 movement speed, they have high hand attack, they have multipliers against cavalry, the whole 9 yards. The problem with Barbary Corsairs is that, unlike Rodaleros, they don't have as much range, they don't have as much melee resistance, they have a much lower resistance compared to Rodaleros, and so even though they do have more HP, they tend to go down just as fast. They do a significantly larger chunk of damage, and they are, you know, it's still a mercenary version of Rodaleros, but whereas most units that are a mercenary version of other units are, you know, notably higher and better than Rodaleros, the gap between Barbary Corsair and Rodalero is a lot lower, is the best way I would say to put it. Let's see here. Next we'll talk about, let's finish up the heavy cavalry, I think. There are quite a few more heavy cavalry units that we can talk about. Uh, so let's talk about the Royal Horsemen. This is a new mercenary that was recently added with the Knights of Mediterranean. It is available in Age 4 and is the most expensive non-canon mercenary in the entire game, costing 500 coin apiece and taking up 5 whole population. Now, what is this unit, you ask? It's a mercenary cuirassier. It has high HP, it has good attack, and it has splash. And you would think by the sounds of it that that means it would be really, really good. It's not. It's not good. Despite being a mercenary version of the Cuirassier, which is a tanky unit that has area effect and high attack, the Royal Horseman is tanky, but not as tanky as the Elmedi or the Mameluke or even the Sinar Horseman. And it hits hard, but it has the same attack as a Hussar at 30 attack. It does have 3 area effect, which is the Cuirassier aspect to it, but overall its stats are actually very comparable to real Cuirassiers, but they're way more expensive and take up way more population. And if you see Royal Horsemen, unless you really need a heavy cavalry unit, you're better off picking up something else as your mercenary. So I'm going to throw the Royal Horsemen in here. Now, I do think they are a little bit more viable than the Napoleon gun or the Little Bombard, for example, because, fuck, dude, if I have the choice between a Little Bombard and a Royal Horseman, you can bet your sweet ass I'm taking the Royal Horseman, because that's like 750 HP and a whole bunch of area effect on the battlefield, but goddamn is it just not population or cost efficient compared to any of the other mercenaries. Additionally added, let's talk about the Jet Lancer since that one's a little bit older. The Jet Lancer is going to go in probably the top of B tier. The Jet Lancer is a relatively tanky unit. It's available in Age 3. It has 600 HP, which is only 150 less than the Royal Horseman, but available in Age earlier and way cheaper. This thing has quite. This is a mercenary version of Lancers, and I do mean like the actual right and proper Spanish Lancers, where they have a 4 times multiplier against all infantry just in general. The Jet Lancers are are a very niche unit, kind of like Lancers themselves, because they suffer from the same weaknesses in that if the enemy mass is heavy cavalry, you're not going to trade very well into them, and you're probably just going to get fucking shredded. Now, they don't get shredded on a per unit basis as much, just because they are mercenaries and they have higher stats, but they do still suffer from the same problem where if your enemy mass is cavalry, you're a little bit, let's say, not in the greatest position here. So the Jet Lancers are a middle-of-the-pack mercenary. They are a great unit to take into a lot of situations, but just like the Armed Pistolier and the Giant Grenadier and a lot of the other Musketeers, they're just a very nice all-rounder unit that can do its job well, but they're not going to win the game by getting 5 of them like Mamelukes will. Fuck. Also added into the heavy cavalry category is the Bosniak, which I think is a little bit higher than the Lancer. So Bosniaks are mercenary versions of Chinakos. They have Naginata type multipliers where they have multipliers against heavy infantry, but against infantry, but a negative multiplier against heavy infantry. But they have a higher, but in exchange they have a higher base attack. Which means they don't get murked by, which means they don't lose as hard to cavalry as things like Jet Lancers and Spanish Lancers do. However, the reason I say it's like the Chinako is that in addition to all of these great things about the Naginata, and it also has the Chinako thing where it has multipliers against other cavalry in melee, meaning it not only doesn't lose to cavalry like the Jet Lancer, it can actually win pretty hard against cavalry. These things just absolutely shred pretty much anything they touch in melee unless it's a Musketeer. Or like a pikeman or a halberdier, so you want to keep those away from that. But the Bosniaks are just an absolutely wonderful addition Age of Empires 3 with the Knights of the Mediterranean, and they're a very serviceable heavy cavalry unit. If you spot them, they're a very good unit to start training and making. I highly recommend you try these guys out if you haven't already. They are just very, very good at what they do. Another one of our heavy cavalry units that we have in here is the Stratiot. The Stratiot is literally a mercenary version of the Hussar. It's got no multipliers. It's just got a big HP pool and a big heavy attack. And you know what? I like it. It does its job well. It's an extremely universal unit. I generally think that when it comes to mercenaries, I want mercenaries to be universal units that are good against everything, because if they're very niche, then they're not great, because because getting good mercenaries rolled in your tavern is already a very niche thing to begin with, and you want your mercenaries that you do get at your tavern to be good at everything. And in that regard, the Stratiot is very, very solid at its job. I don't think it's quite as good as the Bosniak, but it's really damn close. Like, it's really damn close. They're very comparable, honestly. Also in the heavy category, we have the Harkebuser. Now, Harbs are very, very high DPS mercenaries. These guys shred anything they touch with just a ludicrous amount of damage. But in exchange, they have one of the lowest HP pools for a mercenary cavalry unit in the game. I think they only have like a little over 200. They die very fast if you don't baby them. But if you use them in the right circumstances, they will just shred entire militaries in the blink of an eye. You do need to be very, very careful with them. They are pretty much the exact definition of a glass cannon. Even more so than the actual cannons in the game. I definitely think that they're not... I don't think they're as good as the Stratiot or the Jat Lancer, just because they're so much less tanky and you have to be very careful with them. But I also don't think they belong in the same category as Landsknechts, Barbary Corsairs, and Royal Horsemen, so we're going to put them probably at the bottom of B tier. They're still notably better, but you know, they're kind of mixing it there. There are other better options than Harbs. Harkebusers do their job really, really well, but you have to be extremely careful with them, or they will die very, very fast. And I do believe that is the last of the melee cavalry. There are a lot of melee cavalries here. So let's transition with what I think is the easiest unit to transition from melee cavalry with, and that is the Yojimbo. We're going to use the Yojimbo to transition from melee cavalry to range cavalry, and that is because the Yojimbo basically serves the role of both. Yojimbo are definitely an S-class unit. I think they're better than the Senior Horsemen. The Yojimbo is a dragoon-type unit. It is a cavalry archer mercenary, just like the Manchu. And it has very high melee resistance, which normally you would think is something that you wouldn't really want in a mercenary. But the secret to Yojimbo is that if you put the Yojimbo in melee mode, they have a very large area of effect on their splash attack. They have a very large area of effect on their melee attack, and they essentially go from being high DPS goons to high DPS cuirassiers that will wipe out skirmishers in seconds if you let them. The Yojimbo are a very, very solid unit. A lot of people don't give them enough credit and don't respect them enough, and then you just put the Yojimbo in melee, and you'll see what happens. You'll see what happens. That's what I can definitely say about the Yojimbo. You'll fucking see. In A tier, I think a lot of the Dragoon type units a lot of the Dragoon types in the Mercenaries are pretty good. And then in A tier, the top of A tier, I'm going to put the Manchu. Manchu are very, very good. They are one of the better. They're one of the better bull rider type mercs in the game. They're available in Age 3. They have a lot of damage. They have quite a few hit points. They also have amazing voice lines, very entertaining to listen to. And yeah, no, they're good. There's no other reason to like. They have no X factor. They're just good, and they're in a good unit class. You know, they have high damage, they have high speed, they have good HP. They're good. There's no other way to describe it. Now, let's talk about the Canary Guard. So there are, with African Royals came two mercenary dragoons, the Canary Guard and the Good One, which I think you guys will realize means that where I'm putting the Canary Guard, I'm putting it right here. It's better than the Royal Horsemen, but not by much. The Canary Guard has more HP and damage than the Zenata Rider, and it costs a little bit more as well. But the Zenata Rider is far, far better for one simple reason that we will go over in a little bit. The Canary Guard is a dragoon. It is a ranged cavalry unit, and it's kind of just unremarkable. Its damage output isn't as high as the Manchu. It isn't anywhere close to the Manchu, really. It's just a goon. That's all I'll say about it. It's not particularly tanky. It's none too impressive, you know. On the other hand, the Zenata Rider, I'm going to put probably right here above the Jat Lancer. And the Zenata Rider is a very, very good mercenary that you can mass quite well. In fact, I'm actually tempted to put it in A tier with right next to the Bosniak, because I think they're right about the same quality here. The reason the Zenata Rider is a mercenary version of the Javelin Rider. And the Zenata Rider has a tiny bit less HP than the Canary Guard and a tiny bit less damage. They are also a little bit cheaper, so you might think, well, what's the reason that they're so much better than the Canary Guard? And the reason is because they only take up 2 population compared to the Canary Guard's 3. You can mass Zenata Riders like nothing else. There are very few mercenaries that you can really, really mass in large quantities, but you can mass Zenata Riders in equal numbers as you can mass goons, and they're better than goons. They will fucking shred at pretty much everything in their path. They're very similar to Eagle Runner Knights in that regard, in that they just have high DPS and high movement speed, and you can pack a lot of them together. So that's the reason that the Zenata Rider is up here. The Black Rider, I'm going to put in the same spot as the Canary Guard. It has quite a bit of melee resistance, and it does quite a bit of damage, but, you know, it doesn't have the same thing that the Yojimbo has going for it, where it has a very strong area of effect melee attack. It's just a goon. It's a cool-looking goon, and it's a powerful goon. It's still a fucking goon, and it's still a Black Rider. If somebody ships Black Riders, then you know they mean business, but they're not the hardest mercenary dragoons to kill in the world. That's really all it is. You know, they're tanky, but, you know, they're not overly zealous and fantastic. You know, the Zouave I'm gonna put in the middle of the pack. Quite simple. It got buffed recently. I think it's better than the Akon, better than the Highlander, but worse than either of these two. Zouaves are mercenary versions of Marines. They have very high base HP, very high attack, very reasonable cost, and they have like no tags that anything has multipliers against. Their biggest threat is going to be Lancer-type cavalry, but other than that, they'll pretty much fight anything on even terms, and that's pretty much the whole job of the Zouave and the Marine and the Papal Zouave that Italy got in this most recent edition. Zouave are just good. They're solid. They're not the best things in the world. They're not the worst things in the world. They get the job done. They're not countered by skirmishers, which is really, really nice. Additionally, in B tier, we're going to put the Swiss Pikemen. The Swiss Pikemen, we're going to put a little bit lower than the Zouave. The Swiss Pikeman is here because it has high siege, and it's got good movement speed, and it just shreds cav to pieces if it touches cav. It's a little bit niche, but it's really, really good at its job, and its niche purpose, which I know you guys know I don't like super niche things for Marines, but its quote-unquote niche purpose is something that you can use in every game. High siege and anti-cav. It has a very, very good niche, and it will do its job very, very well. They're also relatively inexpensive. You can mass these guys quite easily. And Swiss Pikemen will just, if you need a pike unit, Swiss Pikemen will get the job done, right and proper. Over in the C tier, we're going to be putting Ronin. Now, Ronin are obviously samurai. I think they're better than the Barbary Corsair, but worse than the Landsknecht. Ronin are absolute monsters if they touch anything. They have exceedingly high damage output and just the stupidest siege attack you've ever seen. They got like 600 HP. They're very, very good samurai. The problem with them is that they cost 400 coin a pop, and that's the same cost as a Mameluke. And let me tell you, they ain't no fucking Mameluke. The Ronin is here for the same reason the Napoleon gun and the little bombardier here, and that is their cost. Now we're going to stick 3 more in S tier real quick. 3 we're gonna stick in S tier. Well, no, we're gonna stick 2 in S tier. We're gonna stick the Jaeger and the Mounted Rifleman into S tier. Jaegers, everybody knows Jaegers. They're good at their job. They're really, really good skirmishers. They have 30 base attack. They're available in Age 3, so you can even get them, relatively early. It's a Jaeger, If you see Jaegers, you go, oh fuck, I need a counter for Jaegers, Jaegers are good at their job. That's pretty much all there is to it. You can never go wrong with making Jaegers, because even if the enemy makes your counter, they still got more damage on their range attack than a fucking Musketeer, so they'll still shoot pretty well. The Mounted Rifleman is... I don't even know where to begin with this guy. The Mounted Rifleman is a heavy cavalry unit that has multipliers against infantry and just an exceedingly powerful range attack of 70. The Mounted Riflemen are just absolute monsters. They have a huge amount of HP. They have an absurd amount of damage and good multipliers, but they lose to all cavalry. They are everything about the Lancer, but fucking on crack and with 15 range, which makes them good because you can hit and run against things that you can't necessarily hit and run with the Lancer. So they take everything that's awesome about the Lancer, but like without any of the flaws. They have negative multipliers against cavalry and pretty much lose to cavalry, yes, but it's 70 fucking range attack. 70 at 15 range. That's higher range than most musketeers. The mounted riflemen will just shred everything they touch, and it is quite literally as simple as that. You see these in your tavern, you make these at your tavern, because there is not too much there is not too much else that can beat these guys. They are a heavy cavalry unit with 15 range, and you cannot go wrong. Alright, next is the Gatling Camel. The Gatling Camel, this may shock a couple of you guys, but I'm actually going to put the Gatling Camel in A tier and not S tier. For the simple reason that they are flimsy, and they get countered by everything. They have the Siege Elephant problem, where like they have both the ranged cavalry and the artillery tag, and so they get multipliers. And so pretty much everything in the entire game has multipliers against them. But they are much better than Siege Elephants because they are faster than Siege Elephants and also dish out actual damage to military units instead of buildings and other artillery. Now, they will get just absolute hard countered by both Dragoons and Culverins, which are very popular units to make in the game, obviously. They're also locked to Age 4 and rather expensive, and they don't have very many hit points, so you have to be kind of careful with them. Under the right circumstances, these can be game-ending, and they probably should be in S tier, and probably are in S tier for most people's lists, but this is my list, and you can fuck off. Now, the Pandor. I had a hard time deciding where I wanted to put the Pandor. The Pandor has multipliers against skirmishers, and it has a good multiplier against skirmishers. It is a skirmisher that still will do its job relatively okay against heavy infantry, but does its job especially well against other skirmishers, and will also do its job well against dragoons. Now, the Pandor is locked till Age 3, and it doesn't have very many hit points, and it has pretty middle of the pack range resistance. But what it lacks in individual stats, it more than makes up for with its very, very low cost. These guys only cost like 120 coin apiece. And that is a very, very good price for what you're getting. The Pandors will essentially counter 3 different units, 3 different like unit classes in the game, and they're very cheap, and they only cost 2 populations. So you know what? I kind of like them. I don't think that they are the best thing out there. I don't think they're the worst thing out there, though. So we're gonna put the Pandor, probably around the same area as the Harkabooser, I think. Yeah, I think that looks about right. You'll see them just about as often as Harkaboosers. Now, Iron Troops. This is an easy A tier for me. Iron Troops are really, really good for the same reason, for just one reason and one reason alone, and that is 60% range resistance. These guys have almost cannon levels of range resistance, but they only take up 2 population, and they're relatively cheap to mass. They're not the cheapest mercenaries out there, but god fucking damn do they last long, and they have just the most ludicrous DPS that you can see. If you they're H4 mercenaries, they're worth it. And I think if the H4 requirement is the only thing that's really holding them back, China can get a card that enables you to train these guys in H3, and a lot of China players underestimate that card and don't send it, which is a real shame because they should. These guys are just monsters. And if you every once in a while on some of the Asian maps, you'll find a treasure that has 1 or 2 of these Iron Troops. You see that treasure, you fucking take it. It is just that simple. Iron Troops will just be like, ha, 5 Musketeers? Let me solo that. They are nuts. And yeah, the Iron Troops are are really good to pair with Manchus as well, because then you have the Stern Goon going, and they're both really solid units that just complement each other, They also both speak the same language, so, they can probably communicate with each other, not that that has anything to do with anything. I think the weirdest thing about the Iron Troops is that they're very misleading. By their profile picture, you would think that the Iron Troop is like a spear unit, like a pike unit, but it's not. It's actually an archer. And I think that's one of the most misleading profile pictures for a unit in the game. And lastly is the Dahomey Amazon. I look at the Dahomey Amazon stats, and the stats are good. They have a decent amount of range attack. They're very similar to Jaegers, They can do range. They can do melee damage at range depending on how far away they are from their target by throwing knives, which also has a faster firing animation. The Dahomey Amazon on paper feels so good, and yet every time I use them, I feel like I get steamrolled, and I don't know why. But there has to be some reason for it, and so just from my own personal experience and playing with them, I can't see myself putting it any higher than the Canary Guard. I think they're very comparable. They're both units that seem like they'd be really good on paper, but just kind of don't work out whenever you use them. And yeah, I think that about sums up my Mercenary tier list. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day, and goodbye. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. This was, as ever, a ton of fun to make. If you enjoyed the video, please do consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out, and have a great day.